Thank you. My name's Dean Godson. I'm Director of Policy Exchange. It's my privilege to be able to kick off this first in our programme of events here at Conservative Conference, and it's a fantastic lineup on one of the greatest issues of the day. It covers a wide range of opinions on the matter. We're hoping for an even wider range of opinions from the floor when we open up the discussion. Each of our speakers will do 5 minutes piece, and then we'll open with the Q&A. My great privilege to be able to do this, not least because Policy Exchange has played a significant part, highly significant, many would argue, in the debate on the backstop, with the writings of Lord Trimble for us, Lord Bew, the work of Ray Bassett for us, our senior fellow for EU Affairs, who's come over here from Dublin today, senior former member of the Department of Foreign Affairs and negotiator of the Good Friday Agreement, Dr. Graham Gudgeon, our senior economic advisor, and many others besides. And the richness of this contribution is reflected in the participants in our panel today. It's my pleasure, although he often has to come on the longest journey to London for our events, Graham Brady, who has the shortest journey today as a local MP for Altrincham and Sale, and so he will kick off proceedings, and then we'll go on to our other panelists. So Graham.
Thank you very much, Dean. Ladies and gentlemen, I also always like to say to people when we're here in Manchester for a conference that the conference hotel, the Midland, my great-grandfather was one of the joiners who built the staircase. So I feel particularly... I'll take the applause on his behalf. Not sadly able to enjoy it. But the last time Kate and I shared a platform in Manchester, it seems so long ago, doesn't it, Kate? I think was at Manchester Central, and it was a grassroots out rally that was going on. Slightly surreal. I remember we were all played into the sound of the Magnificent Seven theme music, and I think I was speaker number 6 out of 7, which is not a great place to be, so I'm delighted to be able to start the ball rolling here. But isn't it amazing? Almost exactly 8 months ago, I tabled an amendment in the House of Commons, which became widely known as the eponymous Brady Amendment. Essentially, what I had tried to do was identify the principal problem with the withdrawal agreement that had been put forward, and to test the proposition that if that was addressed in some way, then we could actually secure a parliamentary majority for some kind of Brexit proposition. Well, sadly, 8 months on, I retain the unwanted distinction of being the only person ever to have passed a positive proposition relating to Brexit in the House of Commons. I still believe that the proposition that I put forward, which secured a majority of 16, we used to think that was a narrow majority, but in today's world, we'll take anything we can get. And I still think that basic proposition that if you deal with the backstop, which has the 2 principal problems, one is that it seeks to treat Northern Ireland differently from the rest of the United Kingdom, so is anathema to Unionists, whether they be Unionists in the DUP or the Labour Party or the Conservative Unionist Party. That being the first problem, and the second fundamental problem, that it could potentially leave the whole of the United Kingdom locked into the customs union forever and unable to leave without the permission of the other side. So those are the 2 fundamental problems with the backstop. We tested it, we got a majority, we know that it can work. My own instinct is that 8 months further on, and all of the pain and difficulty that the country has faced since, and the way in which our politics has become paralysed and unable to move forward with Brexit, I think there are more people today in the House of Commons who would be prepared to support that proposition than there were 8 months ago. The work has been done. Dean was quite rightly drawing attention to Policy Exchange's contribution, the work done by Prosperity UK's Alternative Arrangements Commission. There are well-developed proposals which can be put forward, which can be demonstrated that they would work. And if those are accepted, then we have a way forward. I don't know if that's 5 minutes or not, but I think that's enough.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you you very much, Dean, and it's great to be in Manchester because my wife's family have very strong links to the city, and we've been over it quite a few times, and in many ways that encapsulates the fact that our two islands are very interdependent. And I'm going to give you today a slightly different view from Dublin than has been coming out on the official side. And I think the way to start is that nothing has probably divided opinion on the island of Ireland and fractured that opinion as much as Brexit and following on from Brexit, the backstop. And those fractures have the potential to undo a lot of the good work that's been done in the last 25 years since the Republican and Loyalist ceasefires in 1994. And given that background, you would expect that the official reaction in Dublin should have been very careful and thought out, because the ramifications were obviously going to be very great for everybody living on the island of Ireland and our relations with our nearest neighbour, the United Kingdom. Unfortunately, from my own experience, and at the very start of Brexit, I was still working in the Department of Foreign Affairs. I don't believe the Irish government took that considered line. I think they took a very, very partisan line, aligning themselves with Brussels, who viewed Brexit as an existential threat to the Union itself. So the Irish government was aligning itself, in my view, with Brussels when our national interest called for something different. Also, the government claimed that their approach to the backstop was essentially to protect the Good Friday or Belfast Agreement. My view is, and I was there in Castle Buildings at the time, that essentially the present policy represents a real threat to the Good Friday Agreement. And it's interesting reading the media and listening to a lot of political commentators speaking about the Good Friday Agreement, and most of them seem to be absolutely ignorant of the actual contents of that agreement. And a lot of what they say, where they're claiming to actually protect it, is in direct violation of the terms. In addition, I honestly believe, and I don't like criticising my own government when I'm outside the country, I believe that the rhetoric employed by the Taoiseach Leo Varadkar and Taoiseach Simon Coveney has soured British-Irish relations with certain parts of the British public, particularly large sections of the Conservative Party. And that's not in anyone's interest. The background is that Ireland is overwhelmingly the beneficiary of the current benign arrangements between Britain and Ireland, mainly on the common travel area. England is by far and away the host to the largest Irish-born population outside the island of Ireland, and to our SMEs and to our food industry, the UK is the key market. For our large multinational industries, the United States and mainland Europe may be more important, but for the the SMEs in the food industry, the UK is the key market. And given that background, the natural tendency, looking from the outside, should be that Ireland should be the UK's strongest ally inside the EU, and we should be pushing for the smoothest and the best Brexit for the United Kingdom. And we should be, as I often said in the writings, Ireland should have been a bridge between Brussels and London. But right from the start of the Cameron negotiations, right up to the continued intransigence, what I believe intransigence on the backstop, the Irish government have taken a course which seems to me, certainly on prima facie, to be completely inimical to our national interest. And the reason for that is the Irish political class have never really understood Brexit. We've been subjected over the years to so much heavily subsidised pro-EU propaganda that our people, when Brexit occurred, are totally perplexed. There's a huge desire in Ireland to ascribe Brexit solely to perverse motivations such as racism, English nationalism, and a desire to return to the old days of the empire. And issues such as national sovereignty, a desire to tailor domestic policies in Britain to suit its own national interests, control of immigration and its maritime resources, and a desire to be a fully independent state are dismissed as a smokescreen. They're not the real. It's very hard sometimes to get people to say that there are people in Britain who want Brexit for patriotic reasons, and there is a desire not to confer any legitimacy whatsoever to Brexit, and that has crowded their judgment. And therefore, the Irish political class have worked tirelessly with the Remainers in London and with Brussels to thwart the democratic outcome of the referendum vote. And this is certainly not in the interests of either Britain or Ireland. And that myopic view is spread in the Irish media. If you watch the Irish media, you will see that. whatever decision, we've got to take some very serious decisions in Ireland about our future direction, and we need a proper debate and a contest between ideas. But the Irish media seems to believe that its commitment to diversity is having panels made up of equal numbers of male and female contributors, all anti-Brexit, and it's the antithesis of balance. Unfortunately, for some organisations, diversity and equality issues have been reduced to a ticking exercise on gender. Also, Ireland's position in Europe is changing. In 2019, the Republic of Ireland will pay over, as a net contribution, €1 billion. It's very hard to get the figures in Dublin. I had to use the freedom of information to find out that. Last year we were net contribution of 800, the year before that 300, and it's been escalating up to a stage where it's now in the same area per capita as the United Kingdom. The new policies being developed by Brussels in areas like tax harmonisation, militarisation of the EU, cuts to the cap, are all going against our interest. Therefore, the balance of advantage for Ireland in continuing to follow a slavish Brussels line is diminishing. Now, my view is that the Irish authorities on the backstop need to work directly and cooperatively with London to achieve a bilateral agreement to keep the Irish border free from physical infrastructure. It will require compromises on both the Irish and EU side, as well as some different treatment for Northern Ireland from the rest of the United Kingdom in areas like animal and health standards. When we were looking at drawing up the Good Friday Agreement, the two governments looked at examples everywhere. They looked at the situation in Transylvania, they looked at the situation in the South Tyrol, they looked at the Åland Islands, and none of them fitted. So when people sort of turn around and say, but you cannot point to an exact example of how a border can be policed in the way you're talking about, that is not an answer against trying this, because every agreement, every arrangement is a bespoke arrangement. Circumstances are different on the ground everywhere. And in our case, we need to get away from treating Brexit as an orange-green issue on the island of Ireland, and to use reason and logic. The issues relating to the Irish border post-Brexit primarily concern two jurisdictions on the island and are best solved by direct Irish-British negotiations. The backstop isn't the answer. It's essentially in the interests of federalists in Brussels, and it's amazing how it started off. Everybody said the backstop was to protect the Good Friday Agreement. That's virtually disappeared from the vocabulary. It's now all about protecting the single market. In other words, it's about protecting the interests of Brussels. Therefore, I believe, just as it was on the common travel area, and I'm going to finish now, Dean, it is much better if we came together, Dublin and London, produced a scheme for the border, and then went to Brussels with a solution, not with a problem. And it would be very difficult for Brussels to reject a joint approach. And that may call for some changes to Ireland's position in the single market to make it easier to have a frictionless border. But at the moment, unfortunately, in my view, the Irish government is fixated on maintaining itself right in the centre of Brussels. But all it's delivering us is this backstop. And if you push the backstop to its logical conclusion, you'll end up with a hard border and you'll end up with barriers between the islands of Ireland and Britain, something we don't want. So by any criteria, pushing the backstop doesn't make the slightest bit of sense in my view. Thank you very much.
This is an historic occasion because this is the member for Lambeth Vauxhall's first visit to a Conservative conference. The reaction now indicates the esteem and affection which she's held across the divide, and particularly the good that she's made an effort to come today from Northern Ireland. Looking forward, what we have to say, that's no pressure on you, Kate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The problem is Dean's very difficult to turn down. I remember him ringing me and talking constantly when he was writing his book on David Trimble. So when he asked me to come to here, I'm very pleased to be here. I must say it's a much better dressed party conference. It's great to be sharing a platform with people who understand Northern Ireland and who understand the backstop, and I think that's been a problem with politicians across the divide in the United Kingdom, that many of them have not taken much time over the years to understand Northern Ireland. Indeed, when there's been debates over the years, there's usually been the small number who are members of the Northern Ireland Backbench Committee and a few others who take an interest. And it's so interesting to see so many of my colleagues in particular suddenly expounding their knowledge and their views about Northern Ireland when most of them really hadn't a clue about even where Belfast was. My bottom line on all of this is a Labour Unionist, and it's great to be on the same platform as Arlene, who I've known for a very long time, that I will not vote for any withdrawal agreement that in any way separates out Northern Ireland from the rest of the United Kingdom, that in any way sets in train, a kind of drip approach to what could happen in the future, because that is the danger, that we give something just a little bit because it's nice to be compromised and so on, and then actually that is used by people who are seeing a very different future for Northern Ireland. I've felt very strongly that as a Conservative and Unionist party, it was quite shocking for previous Prime Minister to even think of having a backstop.
Exactly.
I said to her when I went to see her at the time when she was seeing lots of people about voting for her deal, you know, how could she, as a Conservative Unionist Prime Minister, actually vote for something, work for something, suggest something, get the EU to agree something that was going to keep Northern Ireland so differently, and also keep us in a customs union. Because for me, being out of the customs union is practically the most important thing about leaving the European Union, if we're serious about what's going to happen. I'm very clear on that. And then the second thing I'm very clear on is that I'm afraid, I can criticise the Irish government, because it's not my country. Mind you, I criticise my own government too. It's very clear that this was a deliberate attempt by, first of all, the Irish government with the changeover. Let's not forget that when the previous Taoiseach had already allowed, after we voted to leave, meetings of civil servants. I don't know how much good was happening, but they were working on, they knew there were difficulties with the border, and they were already doing that. And when Leo Varadkar came in, he stopped all that. And it's very clear in the book that's been written about him that he made a point, this is going to be an opportunity for them to play the politics, not just within their own internal political system and the minority government, but also to look at the long-term future, which of course is what they want, a united Ireland. And then coupling that with the European Union, who then jumped on the idea that this was a very good way of making this difficult as possible for us to leave. The backstop became that big, huge issue that actually, if you read any of the documents that have already been referred to about the solutions, even the EU committee, one of the EU committees itself, produced Smart Border 2.0, just after the referendum, very clear about how the technology could work, how there were solutions. What they said, and of course what the other document by Prosperity UK, the alternative arrangement one, it is important that it is done with goodwill and pragmatism. And I'm afraid there's been no goodwill and no pragmatism from either the Irish government or the European Union. And that has meant that we have spent all this time talking about a backstop, that with that goodwill, there could be real changes to, and it doesn't even need to be there in the first place. There is already, we know, a border in the sense of a different currency, different excise duties, different VAT, miles, kilometres, and there are cameras at the border, because speed limits actually work on both sides of the border, and there are cameras on both sides of the border. So Theresa May to say right at the very beginning, and we want no more cameras, or we don't want cameras, that again was one of her big mistakes. She really, really did not look into the issue, and I don't know who was guiding her, but it certainly wasn't people who knew about Northern Ireland. And in my view, we can actually make this work. I personally think that even with the backstop removed, I would find the withdrawal agreement not satisfactory. I don't think that it actually allows us to leave properly. And for those people who said, well, it didn't say you voted for no deal. Well, it didn't say we voted for a backstop. It didn't say on the ballot paper that we voted to be 50% in and 50% out. It didn't say that we would wait for 3 years. It didn't say that we would have pay 39 billion pounds. So for me, it's very clear that we need a clean break. And of course, coming from Northern Ireland, I'm very proud that Boris Johnson has actually called the Ben bill a surrender bill, because we know all about no surrender bill. And finally, I would just say that, you know, whatever people say about the difficulties about that small amount of trade, and let's remember how small percentage-wise the trade that goes from the Republic of Ireland into Northern Ireland, and the Northern Ireland trade into the Republic of Ireland, no matter what the difficulties are, where there is a political will, a legal way can be found, and that should be happening, and that can happen. Thank you.
Thank you. I know the sacrifices you've made to come today and the effort you've made, and it's a pleasure. Thank you for your friendship to our organisation.
Not at all, and thank you, Dean, for all the work that Policy Exchange have been doing. As Kate Hoey has quite rightly said, it's very difficult to say no to you, Dean, hence we're all here. And can I say, to those of you who came, you probably thought if you were to hear the phrase "no surrender" today, it would come from the DUP. There you are. Here we are. Anyway, look, I just wanted to reflect on the Belfast Agreement, because before someone from the floor says that, I will say it, I didn't vote for the Belfast Agreement in 1998, because as a young, perhaps idealistic, Unionist, I felt the price was too high in terms of prisoner releases, in terms of what was going to happen to the Royal Ulster Constabulary, never mind the accountability of ministers. There was no linkages with decommissioning. This is all back in the days of history. You might think that's 21 years ago, but I just think it's important to say that. But when the referendum happened, and there was overwhelming support for it in Northern Ireland, and indeed in the Republic of Ireland as well, I had to accept that. I had to accept that that referendum had happened and that people had supported the Belfast Agreement. And I then moved on to the next battle, which was in and around trying to make sure that it wasn't implemented in a way which did violence or did damage to individuals in Northern Ireland, or indeed groups like Innocent Victims, which I have worked with all throughout my political career. And I stayed within the Ulster Unionist Party, where I then was until 2003, trying to fight that battle. So the reasons I was against the Belfast Agreement was not that I was against any agreement in terms of what was going on in Northern Ireland at that time. Of course, I recognised that we needed to have power sharing in Northern Ireland, given the history of Northern Ireland, given people's different mandates in Northern Ireland and everything that had happened. But I just wanted to say that I was in favour of an agreement, but I couldn't support the Belfast Agreement at the time because of those very huge issues for me personally. But then the 2006 St Andrews Agreement came along, and by that stage, of course, all the prisoners had been released. The RUC had gone. We had now a new police service, and St Andrews dealt with the issue of ministerial accountability. So to the Belfast Agreement and what Mark Durkan called the ugly scaffolding, it's there. It provides a balance between the two communities, and now we have the backstop, which takes us back to majority rule in Northern Ireland. And that's what it's about. Because when I hear the European Union speak now, they say, oh, the majority of people in Northern Ireland want the backstop. Well, that's not what the Belfast Agreement was about. It was making sure that you had the consent of the majority of Unionists and the majority of Nationalists in Northern Ireland. And quite simply, the backstop does not have that consensus. And so to the Tusk letter that the Prime Minister sent very recently, and he rightly says in that letter that the backstop is anti-democratic, it is inconsistent with the sovereignty of the United Kingdom, and we would be indefinitely kept within the European Union with a border down the Irish Sea if you go for the Northern Ireland only backstop. And of course, the Attorney General's famous opinion that there was no exit from this backstop. So it gives no democratic say to us after the withdrawal over rules imposed by the European Union, hence the anti-democratic nature of it. and it weakens that very delicate balance in Northern Ireland between unionism and nationalism. And Ray has expounded very clearly what he believes to be the view from Dublin, and I think Dublin has actually, I'm really saddened by their attitude to the fact that unionism doesn't support the backstop. I listened to the Taoiseach just last week on Radio 4, and he told people that some unionists did support the backstop, others didn't, but he would try and reassure them. It's not about reassuring unionists about the backstop. The backstop is anti-democratic, and therefore we cannot accept it. And I see Bill White in the audience, and Lucid Talk poll said that 81% of unionists that were polled were against the backstop. That's a pretty incredible figure to put out there. So to solutions, and I agree with Kate and the others on this. If there's a will, there is a way. No one wants to have huge infrastructure at the border. I grew up beside the border. I know what infrastructure at the border looks like. But there has to be a willingness to be flexible, to be creative, whilst recognising the constitutional position of Northern Ireland as set down in the Belfast Agreement. We are already two separate legal entities on the island, politically, economically. We're in different monetary jurisdictions, and it works fine. So whilst there are differences, we are two different countries. There are also similarities, and some of the areas have already been mentioned in terms of animal health. We have an all-island animal health because we are one unit. It makes sense for that to be the case. And we acknowledge that. I acknowledge that in a letter I signed with the then Deputy First Minister back on the 10th of August 2016, shortly after the referendum on Europe had taken place. So I firmly believe that there is a way forward, that if the European Union and the Republic of Ireland government in particular care about protecting the Belfast Agreement as they say they are, then they need to acknowledge that the backstop will not do it for Northern Ireland, or indeed for the rest of the United Kingdom, and therefore we need to find a new way forward. Thank you.
Our last panellist, Lord Kane, is delayed on the motorway, but will be here shortly, so I think we'll just get moving with questions from the audience. Usual house rules here at Policy Exchange, no question too outrageous. You just have to state your name and organisation first. Just trying to get a sense of how many people want to ask questions from which bits of the room. Gentleman at the back there, name and organisation. Yes, you.
Sorry, Paul Wisterman, Bethnal Green and Bow constituency. I might have missed this because I was in the queue outside to get in. But in the Irish Times on, I think it was July the 9th, there was an announcement that the Irish government were going to introduce their own, effectively, UK backstop arrangements in the event of a no deal, therefore no backstop Brexit. They were going to carry out checks and things to satisfy the EU requirements behind the border. And that seems to mirror to me what the UK is planning to do. It seemed to me that that had sort of destroyed the rationale for the backstop, because if there's a workaround for it, then the backstop can't actually be necessary. I might have missed some discussion of that, but I'd be grateful for enlightenment from the panel on what that signifies.
Yeah, unfortunately there are conflicting signals coming out. Earlier the Irish government said no matter what happened, there wouldn't be infrastructure on the border. In fact, Juncker actually came to the Irish Parliament and re-echoed that. But since then, the landscape has been changing very slowly. And initially, there was a statement that there may not be checks at the border, but it'll be close to the border. And then some recent statements have been saying, well, maybe they'll have to be at the border. So I think it's a question of trying to keep the public opinion on board, because the Irish government has sold the backstop as a panacea. It's obviously not, and there's a gradual retrenchment from that. If you read statements from last year and you read them from this year, from Irish government spokesmen, it's actually a contradiction in them. But the media don't do that. As I said, we need a paxman in Ireland to really grill ministers, because they say things one month and say a different thing next month, and they're never held to account by the media. Hope that's not too hard on my government.
Well, no, I think that's absolutely right. There have been, and we used to say no one wants to see infrastructure at the border, and then Juncker just said, I think it was last week, that in fact there would need to be, in the event of a no deal, Brexit, some sort of infrastructure, whether that was at the border or a couple of miles from the border. So that seems to have changed from the European Union side, and it seems to have changed from Dublin's side as well, because in their no-deal preparation they are talking about putting in place some checks away from slightly away from the border. But you know, I think Ray's point about they're pushing this backstop so hard, they're actually going to get the very thing they say they don't want, which to me is completely crazy. If you don't want to be in a situation of no deal, and by the way, I don't want to be in it, and I probably disagree slightly with Kate on this issue. I want to see a deal, because I think it would be good for Northern Ireland and good for the Republic of Ireland as well, actually, because I think people forget how much trade the Republic of Ireland do with Great Britain and how much they use Great Britain as a land bridge over to the continent as well. So I do want to see a deal, and I very much support the Prime Minister in his efforts to try and get that deal.
Can I just say on that, I mean, I would love to see a deal. I actually don't think the withdrawal agreement, you see, it's a treaty. It's not really I mean, the deal comes afterwards anyway. That's my view. But I mean, I think we're very far apart, Arlene, are we?
Hugely.
The gentleman there in the middle aisle. Name and organisation, please.
Dennis Staunton from the Irish Times. I have a question for Mrs. Foster. Could you sign up or agree to any kind of administrative arrangement for customs that is specific to Northern Ireland? And to what extent does the strength of the consent mechanism determine how much you can agree to in terms of Northern Ireland specific arrangements?
Well, in relation to the customs piece, we're very, very clear. We have to leave on the same terms as the rest of the United Kingdom. We cannot have internal customs border within the United Kingdom. That would just be an anathema. It has constitutional implications as well as economic implications. Actually, when you think of the amount of trade we do east-west and west-east, it completely blows out of the water the north-south trade. I'm not saying the north-south trade is not important. It is, of course, important, but our east-west trade is by far the more is much more important. So therefore, customs, from a constitutional point of view and from an economic point of view, do not work internally within the United Kingdom. In terms of the consent mechanism, as you know, we point to the fact that in the joint report of 2017, there was a rule for the Assembly. Unfortunately, that was not put into the withdrawal agreement. We regret that that was the case. But you know, I was reading on the way over on the plane, Dean, Charles Moore's extracts of Lady Thatcher's, his final volume, and in that he said, and I thought it was very good to read, and it was almost as if it was sent to me today. She warned after she left office that the European Union had a habit of making sure that vague commitments were later turned into highly specific and damaging proposals. Well, my goodness, if one was to describe the backstop,
Just trying to get a sense of how many questions around the room. Two gentlemen at the front, why don't we take them as a clutch of questions? Name and organisation, please.
Hi, Nico Hines from the Daily Beast. Following on from that topic, if this arrangement is a kind of matter of the survival of the Union, do you trust Boris Johnson with your life?
well, you know,
Graham Hutton, Councillor, Newcastle-under-Lyme, and I have to confess that Ken McGuinness is a cousin of mine. So, the man behind the Belfast Agreement. So my question, mainly for Ray, as somebody, I have family both sides of the border, and many friends ideally live both sides of the border. So I'm quite passionate about Ireland as a whole island. Now, if there is a no deal, would you think that the EU would accept a border between Ireland and the rest of the EU, like they're asking Northern Ireland to accept a border between Northern Ireland and the United Kingdom? Thank you.
Ray, then Ollie.
That's a very good question, and I also am. My grandchildren in Belfast, my son's in Belfast, and I own an apartment in Belfast, so I'm north-south. So I'm just as passionate. I think the EU would accept it if it could break the logjam, and if the Irish government would go along with it, because the actual. And I think Arlene mentioned this, the actual amount of direct trade between the southern Irish ports and the French mainland isn't huge. The bulk of Irish exports go through the western ports in Britain. Holyhead, Liverpool, and go down and go on the land bridge, even the ones to mainland Europe. So I think, I've been saying that I think the Irish government should accept spot checks and that. Remember, in cargoes, somewhere between 1% and 5% are inspected anyway, so it will be a very small amount. And I think that if the Irish government are pushing for an all-island animal and health regime, they should be prepared to pay to give a quid pro quo on some inspections on the Celtic Sea route as well. I think the EU would accept it if it came as a bilateral agreement between the Irish and British government as a way of helping to get a agreement. Because just as the other speakers have said, I believe it's all about political will. If you have political will, you can design the system from then on.
I must say I've been amused by the amount of time since Boris became Prime Minister, how many times I've been asked, do I trust Boris Johnson? I certainly wasn't asked that question the same amount of times with Theresa May, and frankly, I should have been. Because she tried to bounce us into accepting something that would have been injurious to Northern Ireland and to the United Kingdom. She didn't get away with it, thanks to our good friends and colleagues in the House of Commons. And I still go back to the famous Brady Amendment. It must be wonderful to have that Brady Amendment named after you, Graham. That was the time when everybody came together and recognised where the problem was, where the issue was, and it was around the backstop and trying to sort the backstop out. And I do say this, the letter to President Tusk by the Prime Minister was the clearest exposition of why the backstop wouldn't work that I've seen since it was put in place. So, you know, people ask, do you trust X, do you trust Y? I'm probably very much old-style conservative insofar as I believe in individual responsibility, and I trust myself, and we'll see where that takes us.
Well, quite so. I mean, I can't remember who it was who made the point on the panel. I think it was Ray who made the point that you get these different arrangements between different on different borders. And you know, I just think we need to come back to remembering the very long history between the United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland, recognising that throughout the time since partition, there has been quite a lot of flexibility that has been used to make things work. And the common travel area and the common employment area that go with that, which were never put into statute, they just made sense. And it was done for 90 years with it just making sense. And I remember right at the beginning of this process, Bertie Ahern, the former Taoiseach, who I think I quote more or less correctly, when he said 80% of this can be done by technology and the other 20% we can just turn a blind eye to it. You know, it's a sort of rather good sort of British and Irish way of recognising sometimes things aren't perfect, but you can make them work. And that's what we ought to be aiming to do. It can be done. It comes back again to political will. And the great danger, I think, certainly from the point of view of the Republic of Ireland, but also from the UK point of view, that bilateral relationship is so critically important. And we've got to make sure that that is working in the future. And it's rather sad if this unnecessary intransigence about the border arrangements is allowed to damage that bilateral relationship into the future.
Gentleman there, name and organisation, please.
James Sy from The Spectator. Question to Arlene Foster. Could you ever accept regulatory checks between Northern Ireland and Great Britain that extended beyond agriculture? And could you accept Northern Ireland being in both the customs territory of the United Kingdom and the customs territory of the European Union, even after the rest of the United Kingdom has left?
No, I'm going to be very clear about all of that. I think what some people don't understand about the Democratic Unionist Party is that when we set out our position, that is the position, and unfortunately that was the misunderstanding which Theresa May had. She thought that we would change our position, but you have to understand the whole raison d'etre of the DUP is the union. It's the reason we get involved in politics, it's the reason that we stay involved in politics despite all of the challenges that come to us in Northern Ireland. It's about keeping the union and talking about the benefits of the union. So therefore, how can we possibly be in the EU customs customs union and also be in the UK, because if you take that, the way in which it was put in the withdrawal agreement, that we would be in a UK brackets NI situation, then think about what that would do to our agri food, for example. We would be different than the rest of Great Britain. So would that, what way would that impact? Well, what way would that impact on our red tractor? Because all of those different industrial things that are there, because we're in the single market of the United Kingdom, you know, that doesn't work for us if we're also in the European Union taking rules and regulations over which we have no say, no democratic say, and actually the only people who do have a democratic say is Dublin. So, I mean, I don't think as a unionist we should be prepared to expect that, you know, should take that.
Trying to get a sense of a tremendous number of people. Lady there in the middle row. Yep, get to the mic in a second. Name and organisation, please.
Hi, Liz Piper from Reuters. A question for Arlene Foster, if I may. Boris Johnson's government keeps on saying there has been progress in the talks with the EU. Have you seen any evidence of this? And has the EU even moved a little bit?
Well, you don't expect me to comment on negotiations between the Prime Minister and the European Union at such a critical time. You know, I sometimes think that people love to give running commentary now. It seems to be the thing to do when you're in the middle of a negotiation. I can think of some very good examples of people who comment all the time in negotiations. I think a period of silence from a lot of politicians.
Gentleman there on the far side. Yes, you. Name and organisation, please.
Good afternoon, Roger Lomas from West Tyrone. A question for Kate Hoey. What is holding back the Labour Party from contesting elections in Northern Ireland when we see the Deputy Leader at Harland and Wolff standing in solidarity with the workers, taking their union dues and possibly their political levies, but ignoring their political rights?
Oh, that's absolutely right, and I think part of it is ignorance, in the sense that up until quite recently, very few people even realised that the Labour Party, until relatively recently, I think it was about 6 years ago, actually allowed people in Northern Ireland to join the Labour Party, and that only happened because a GMB member was going to take them to court. So you're actually allowed to join the Labour Party in Northern Ireland, even though under the elections, for example, for Tony Blair, all those who paid the trade union levy in Northern Ireland were able to vote for Tony Blair or whoever, but weren't able to be members of the Labour Party. So the whole thing is ludicrous. There was meant to be a challenge now and a report looking into that to say that they could put up candidates, and that has just been completely ignored, really. The reality is that they see still the SDLP as their sister party, which is a bit ridiculous given that it only represents one side of the community, and there seems to be no reason that they're going to change that. Perhaps if the SDLP goes into a formal alliance with the Republic of Ireland party, that makes it slightly different. But you're absolutely right, there's absolutely no democracy involved in people in Northern Ireland have never had the opportunity, except for a short time. You can vote Conservative and the Conservative party does allow membership, but if Labour had come in at the same time and had been proper, what you call it, and Arlene knows I don't mean this any disrespect to the Unionist parties, but it had been what I'd call normal politics in terms of the rest of the United Kingdom, things could be slightly different, but at the moment it doesn't look like it's going to happen, and it is an absolute sham of democracy, and the Labour Party should be challenged 100% on it.
Could you come back and stand?
I'm getting a bit old now.
Lady there, name and organisation, please.
Thank you. Rebecca Butler, Eastleigh Conservatives. Question aimed mainly at the politicians. You talk about the political solutions which we discuss very openly about resolving the backstop. But given the constitutional upheaval and the party political upheaval in our system, where on the EU side is there any need or any agenda to drop the backstop? And even if they did drop the backstop, would Parliament vote for a deal in its current constitution without a backstop in it?
Well, Labour, Labour for all its leadership issues on Northern Ireland and historical things that both Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell have done, did actually speak out against the backstop at the beginning. It has worried me more recently that they seem to be taking a much more softer view on the backstop. So I think, I mean, Parliament, we could spend the next couple of hours talking about what a sham it is, and shambles really, but I don't think Parliament at the moment is in a mood, that there is a majority in Parliament for anything at all really, backstop or no backstop. I mean, it may be that it will get to the stage where it is a number of Labour MPs will decide to vote for it, just to get the whole thing off the agenda, but I can't see that the backstop being removed completely is going to change very much in Parliament. If there are some political parties who are actually not interested in getting Brexit, who want to stop it whatever they do, and would see another reason almost for voting against any kind of deal that the Prime Minister brought back.
Right. I'm more optimistic than that. I think there's no doubt at all the various parliamentary tactics that have been deployed over the last year or so in particular have made it more difficult for the British government to negotiate a good deal with the European Union. And we've seen that right up to this latest business of the order paper being seized and the so-called Ben Act being put in place. But I do think that there is such a strong will amongst quite a large part of the House of Commons to see this done. Most of my Conservative colleagues would vote for that proposition again. I suspect even those 21 who had the whip removed, most of them would probably vote for the withdrawal agreement without the backstop. And I think a growing number of Kate's colleagues, and a growing number of them who can no longer bear to sit on the Labour benches for one reason or another, whether it be anti-Semitism or European matters, I think there is an increasing number who would be prepared to take that leap and to support something to get this landed and to allow British politics to move on.
But if I was in the EU, if I was an EU commissioner, why would I give anything at the moment? You just look at Parliament and you think they're really wanting to stop it, they're really wanting to delay it. Why should we bother? That's the problem.
I'll leave with elected politicians.
Can I just come back on that? I don't mean to dominate this, but is it time perhaps for Boris Johnson to show the leadership? And given how Parliament is constituted, that 70% of MPs represent the voting seats, would it be tactically savvy of him to say to his own party, you get a free vote on this? And then pushing the other parties, particularly Labour, where we know they've got the Leave seat MPs, they would be forced surely to vote for any deal now put before Parliament if the whips were removed and party loyalty was put aside.
It is arguable. I think that obviously the first task is to secure the agreement and to get the movement on the backstop and preferably on one or two things in the political declaration as well. If we can get there, I think you're probably right. Certainly most of my colleagues would vote for this on a free vote, just as they would if it was a whip vote.
In terms of the European Union question, I think obviously the European Union, whilst they will not take their entire direction from how the Republic of Ireland feels about the deal or the proposed deal, they will certainly listen very carefully to what they have to say, and that's why I do bemoan the fact that instead of the good relationships after Brexit that were there when Enda Kenny was in office, that those ceased to continue, and Kate's absolutely right about that. We were having those conversations and they stopped then. Then we had the joint report in December 17 and then the backstop later on, which came to fruition. But I do think that the European Union would like to see a deal. Sometimes when I hear some of the commentary coming out of Europe, which is quite imperialistic, let's be honest, about the United Kingdom, some of the things that Tusk has said in the past about Leave voters, etc., etc. But I think they do want to see a deal because it will be good for their bloc economically as well as anything else, and of course for the Republic of Ireland it'll be absolutely crucial. I think that they will want to see a deal more than any part of the European Union. And so let us get that to the fore instead of this rhetoric that we've had over this past 3 years about, oh, you left, it's your fault, etc., etc., instead of actually respecting the democratic will of the people of the United Kingdom. I mean, people have a right to decide what the future of the country is within their own country without having to worry about everybody else. But I mean, we have taken lessons from the European Union and the Republic in particular about this is all your problem, don't come looking for solutions to us. Instead of, as Ray says, that historic relationship, which actually up until Brexit occurred had become so mature and had become a very good relationship between Great Britain and the Republic of Ireland. And we want to see that back again. We want to see relations back again, improved again, and we want to see good relations north-south as well. We don't want to live in a situation where we're at each other's throats. We want to live in a situation where we're working together collaboratively for each other's good and for each other's benefit, and not where we are at this present moment in time.
Gentlemen, been waiting patiently towards the back by the aisle. Name and organisation, please. Maybe take as a clutch of questions. Whatever suits you best.
Oh, thank you. I'll see it, but that's all right. My question to the panel.
Name and organisation, please.
Oh, Anthony McKenna, South West Bedfordshire Conservative Association. My question to the panel: the biggest risk? Do you find the biggest risk to the Brexit and the negotiations that evolve in Backstop is if a Prime Minister was installed through a cross-party method to which has been discussed in press release from opposition MPs?
If we just take a couple more questions so we can get as many people taken care of as possible. Lady in the front row there. Name and organisation, please.
Thank you very much. I'm Kate Ferguson from The Sun. A question for Eileen. Eileen, are you ruling out supporting a backstop even if there's a time limit on it? And also, referring back to the previous question, it looks like there's going to be a confidence vote in Parliament quite soon. Will you be 100% supporting Boris and the Tories in that vote? And have you any words for the Prime Minister about that?
One more question. The gentleman there, also on that side. Yes. Name and organisation, please.
Ben Laurie from the Belfast Newsletter. This is a question for Ray. You touched on this a little bit. You've been a very isolated voice, almost entirely isolated, not quite. Are you seeing any movement towards behind the scenes from what you hear from your contacts in Dublin?
Ray, why don't you go first?
No, I haven't seen it, but I'm quite certain that a lot of the people who are working there now would have worked with me in the past, and they're bright people and they're good people, and they must be fearful because in the end, how are they going to explain a disaster that a no-deal Brexit is going to bring to them? There's a certain degree of whistling past the graveyard at the moment, but I think a day of reckoning will come, so they must be worried. I haven't seen any public manifestation of that, Ben.
Gentleman there. Does any? Graham.
Well, yeah, the risk of a new Prime Minister and a national unity government, I think, of course, it would be a danger to Brexit, but I think principally because, as far as I can tell, all of the people who talk about a government of national unity and all of the people who are suggested as possible members of such a government actually represent the minority view in the country, which is a very odd kind of national unity. So, of course, it would be unhelpful to Brexit. I guess a genuine national unity government could be there to see Brexit delivered properly, but that's not what they're talking about.
Okay.
Well, it wouldn't be a government of national unity led by a Remain member of Parliament, no matter how long they've been in Parliament, no matter how much service they'd given. I'm thinking particularly of Kenneth Clarke and Margaret Beckett, who seem to be the two names that are being put forward. I think it would be absolutely ridiculous, and I think the country would see through it. The country seeing through Parliament now. You know, just anybody you go out and talk to, even in the streets out here, and ask about Parliament, you almost, I mean, unfortunately now I get a little bit recognised, because otherwise it's this kind of thing you just do not want to admit that you're a member of Parliament.
Lady from the Sun's question.
Oh yes, absolutely. well, before I answer that, I do find it a little strange also when I hear that the SNP are supporting a government of national unity. Can I say, in terms of the time-limited backstop, Kate, can I remind you what Leo Varadkar thinks of the time-limited backstop? He says it's not a backstop at all. In terms of the time-limited backstop, we have said in the past that it's something that we would look at. I don't think it's something that Leo Varadkar would look at, but certainly if a time-limited backstop was on offer, it's something that we would look at, but I don't believe it is at this present moment in time. In terms of the confidence vote, I have to look at the alternative to the Prime Minister, and as you will recall, we are in a confidence and supply arrangement with the Conservative Party, therefore we will give confidence to the Prime Minister. Having said that, if I look at the alternative, with the greatest respect to Kate, I have to say putting Jeremy Corbyn into government is not something that the Democratic Unionist Party will ever be accused of. Because he would be a disaster for Northern Ireland, he would be a disaster for the United Kingdom, both in terms of the economy and in terms of defence and security. But as for Northern Ireland, he would be a complete disaster because, as my deputy leader reminded the House last week, talking about the rule of law when he supported a party who was quite happy to see judges killed in Northern Ireland is quite something. It's quite something.
Another trio of questions would probably be able to accommodate two more. My apologies to anyone who may be disappointed. Gentleman there, gentleman behind you. Name and organisation, please.
Charles Boot, Staffordshire Area Chairman of the party. I've been in business on an international basis for many years. I've done deals in nearly every continent and run operations in them. There is so much talk about I want a deal. I've even heard it from the panel today. I mean, there must be 1,000 variants of a deal that we could do. Yeah. I mean, in the end of the day, a deal has got to be something that lays the foundation for us after Brexit to be able to develop our economy as fast as possible. And if in any way we are controlled by, I'll keep it simple, let's just talk about the common rule book on products. If we are an innovative country, as we say we are, and we come up with an innovative product, and we then have to go cap in hand to the European Commission to say, would you be very kind and put this in your common rule book so that we can work on this product and sell it. They'll take 2 years to do it, by which time they would told Italian and German manufacturers about our new idea, and they will take it all. I mean, it's an absolute rubbish. And that is why there are so many people saying we need to come out on no deal, not because we want any pain, but it's the only way to get a clean sheet. And I would like to know what the panel's comments are on those. Thank you.
There's someone just behind you. Name and organisation.
Adrian Chris, Bromsgrove Councillor. We've had peace since the Good Friday Agreement, and I just want to know that if we get this wrong, what is the chances of more terrorist attacks coming back on our mainland?
One more question. I'm just trying to see. I'm sorry if I disappoint anybody. Lady there.
Thank you. Fran Morrison from Wandsworth Conservatives. We've heard a lot about how the border really only became a big issue when Leo Varadkar became the Taoiseach. We've heard about how he stopped potentially fruitful conversations between civil servants, and really I think with the EU has weaponised the issue of the border. My question is, could the panel speculate on what he thinks is in it for him politically? You pointed out the damage it would do to Ireland not to cooperate. Why is he doing it?
I can ask the panellists all to answer, just sum up concluding remarks in response to those questions. So Graham.
Yeah, well, first of all, Charles, deal or no deal, I find, and I suspect my colleagues find the same thing, more often than not now, visiting businesses of whatever sort, and I was opening a new factory on Trafford Park on Friday, which is a very nice thing to be able to do, and the line that comes back from the business people affected by all of this is, for God's sake, get us some certainty.
Yeah.
More often than not, they'll say we don't care whether it's no deal or a deal, but we can't put up with this constant prevarication and never knowing how it's being settled. I think fundamentally, Giles, of course I don't think we should be bound by a common rule book. I campaigned for and voted to leave because I think we should make our own laws in our own country. And that is, I guess, the thing we just need to keep coming back to. The risk of terrorism, again, I just think all of this can be almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. It was grossly irresponsible of some people to start talking up that possibility for reasons of trying to influence the referendum vote at the time. And I think if both sides were simply to be united in their condemnation of violence and terrorism, then we could reduce any risk that there might be. Finally, what's in it for the Irish government? I don't know. I think Ray will be better able to speculate on that. But it seemed to me early on that it was one of those things that was being fired by the, I hope, erroneous belief that if people were difficult enough about the Brexit process, it would all go away. And we would simply forget that we voted to leave and end up saying, can we please come back? And so at that point, the more awkward and difficult you could be, the more you were being a good servant of the European dream. But I think as we've moved on, it's become more and more obvious that it is a profound risk for the Republic of Ireland.
Right.
Yeah, that's, the question of motivation is actually one I've given a bit of thought to, and it was one of the reasons why I started writing almost as a dissident at the time, because when I came back from Canada and I met with people informally in the Department of Foreign Affairs and the Taoiseach's department, I was actually shocked by the attitude. It was completely different from the time that when we were almost drafting legislation together with the British government in the immediate aftermath of the Good Friday Agreement, and I honestly was taken aback, particularly when I was told that we were going to do nothing to help David Cameron to get a good deal, and it just staggered belief at the time that the Irish government wouldn't make, and I think we're making the same mistake over and over again, that that we're going down this route which is against our national interest. I think it's one thing you've got to understand about Prime Minister departments and foreign ministries and the Foreign Office here is they live in a slightly different world. To be honest with you, I in my time in my career, I always resisted being put into anything to do with the European Union, simply because I didn't have any identification with it. But these people socialise together and they have a European attitude which is different from the population. People go over, there are something like 3,000 small committees in Brussels operating, drawing up proposals on them. It's almost, I wouldn't say a cult, but it's people get into it in a way which, if you've been working on, evacuating citizens from Lebanon or something like that, and you come back and start talking to them, it's almost a different planet that you're dealing with. So I'm slightly mystified because it defies logic. Ireland's interest is so much in making Brexit work as smoothly as possible. I think what Graham said is actually right. I think there was a decision early on, and encouraged very strongly by their counterparts in London, to mess this up and to make it as difficult as possible. Because remember, I was in the senior ranks of the Irish Civil Service when they reversed 2 previous referenda, and from the day that it came in and I was in the department, there was no intention of actually honouring those referenda. The first questions was, how do we get around this? So I've seen it from the other side, and to be honest with you, it defies logic in my mind. I don't know whether that makes sense at all, but it's kind of stream of consciousness from some. Just
on that last question, I absolutely agree with Ray. He obviously knows how the Irish government work more than I do, but I was going to remind people that, of course, they'd had the referendum on the Lisbon Treaty and immediately set out to to overturn it. And of course, I think that still, there was a feeling within the European Union that really, and a lot of the other countries, that we would do that again too, you know, that we just needed to make it difficult, keep it going, delay, and ultimately we get a second referendum. And that's the very last thing that your businesses want to see happening, because absolutely right, Graham, is that they want certainty. And one said to me, you know, just do it and we will make it work. Just tell us and we will make it work, whatever you come up with. And so that's why I don't have that fear about a WTO going out, because I think the first thing that will happen if we were to leave on October the 31st with no agreement, it will concentrate minds everywhere and people will have to sit around the table and work. And if I could just say, the question on terrorism, that is the one that really, and I'm sure it is to Arlene as well, it makes me so angry that we as a democracy in the United Kingdom should be actually saying we are going to shape our policy on the economy, on our future in the European Union, in all of these issues that we're talking about. And we are going to be dependent on a few criminal thug dissidents who might come back, and particularly in the mainland. It was interesting, your question was about the mainland, not worrying, well, I'm not saying you're not worrying, but questions about terrorism on the mainland rather than in Northern Ireland. And let's not forget there's lots of things going on in Northern Ireland all the time that doesn't get hugely reported. So I do think that what the PSNI should be doing, rather than as the previous Chief Constable coming out saying about worries about the border and dissidents in trouble, he should be actually saying, we're going to get these people and we're going to put them where they deserve to be.
So, Dean, concluding thoughts in terms of the issue of just getting out of the European Union. Who would ever have thought that over 3 years later we would still be talking about exiting the European Union? It is dreadful. We do need certainty. There is no doubt about that. But I think it would be remiss of me if I didn't say, from a Northern Ireland perspective, that particularly in the agri sector, some of our supply chains are so integrated that is what forces me to look for getting a deal even at this late stage. I'm trying to get a deal because of the integrated supply chains, particularly in milk, in the milk sector, for example. So, you know, no deal in and of itself, Kate has referred to this, is not a final destination. We all know that. We all know that even if there were to be a no deal on the 31st of October, that we would have to come back and we would have to come to the table again. But I think even at this late stage, we can find a deal that is acceptable to the House of Commons and is acceptable to Europe. So, you know, as someone from Northern Ireland, you have to be an optimist and continue to be an optimist. Can I say in relation to the terrorism point, you know, I have to say, using this as an excuse for terrorism should be seen for what it is, absolutely unacceptable. We have had incidents of terrorism since the Belfast Agreement, regrettably. We have had, even this year, a young journalist was murdered up in Londonderry. So the suggestion that we don't have any terrorism at the moment is not true. Regrettably, we do. And as Kate says, we have to make sure that both the police service and indeed An Garda Síochána have the resources to deal with these dissidents and to put them behind bars to make sure that they are brought to justice and that they can't use the next excuse to attack those of us who identify as British in Northern Ireland. So it's important that we don't give these people any excuse, and it's wrong. And I mean, Graham is right. When Sir John Major and Tony Blair came over to Northern Ireland and said it was going to bring back violence, the reaction of people in Northern Ireland was very, very clear. This is so unacceptable. To use terrorism to get something over the line was the lowest of the low, and I just felt it was totally unacceptable. Finally, Dean, the reason I think why the Irish Government, the European Union, is for all of the reasons that we've heard, the Lisbon Treaty, they thought we would just fold and not actually go through. But I think essentially they wanted to keep the United Kingdom within the customs union, and that's what the backstop is all about. That's what it's all about.
Thank all our panellists. It's been an outstanding panel with which to open with. I'm sure you'll agree. Policy Exchange, as I say, will continue to be at the heart of this debate. Our publications on the subject may be found at the back of the room if people haven't stumbled already. Please join me in thanking